Southwest 3216 only tired, runway 24 right for land.
Hello and welcome to the CAT-08 flight. This is the 8th flight in the Communication and Airspace VFR training program on the PilotEdge network. Today we have a flight from a Class Charlie airport to another Class Charlie airport. Yes, that's right, it's going to be Santa Barbara Airport to Burbank Airport in beautiful Southern California. In the CAT-7 we learned about Class Charlies, at least how to transition them. That was our introduction to any sort of Class Charlie airspace. But today we're going to actually learn how to depart and arrive at Class Charlie airports. Yes, we're going to be departing and arriving at a Class Charlie. Now, as with all the videos, make sure you read the textual briefing here on the CAT-8 page prior to watching this video. It'll just put things in a little bit better perspective. But as we review the briefing here, we will be departing from Santa Barbara Airport. The rating allows you to request flight following on the ground or pick it up in the air. Now, I would highly recommend just getting the flight following on the ground because it's going to make things a little bit easier actually for you and air traffic control. This way you'll just be in the system and they'll know everything about you from the second your wheels leave the ground. It'll also just remove one more thing that you have to do when you're airborne. Let's take a look at our flight plan on SkyVector. I've got it mapped out from Santa Barbara Airport out to Burbank Airport, and I'll be navigating via the Fillmore VOR today. Fillmore is right in the middle of the flight, and with that little bend at Fillmore, it makes it about a 75-mile flight. As with all ratings, you're welcome to navigate however you'd like, although today I'll just be showing you how to do it with a VOR. Now, one thing that jumps out at me immediately about this flight is that we do have a restricted area. We talked about restricted areas back in the CAT-6, and the restricted area is R2519. That's down here near Point Mugu. Now, I don't anticipate getting anywhere close to there today, so I'm not really going to worry too much about it, but any sort of special use airspace that's anywhere in the vicinity of your flight plan should really jump out to you when you're flight planning. That way you know that, for instance, if something happens, maybe a fire or something that prevents us from going over the Fillmore VOR, and we need to now bend out to the shoreline, we know that we can't go too close to the shoreline as we get near Point Mugu. So at least we have in the back of our minds that it's there. It's just good for overall situational awareness. However, assuming everything goes to plan, we'll be overflying Fillmore and we won't get anywhere close to the restricted area. After we pass Fillmore, we'll depart on about the 100 radial, and that'll take us right over to Burbank Airport. Now, as we approach Burbank, there are a few other airspaces that we have to be cautious about, but we'll talk about that in just a moment as we discuss our arrival into Burbank. But first, let's brief our departure out of Santa Barbara. So because we're getting flight following off the ground, and in fact even if we weren't, we're going to still be talking to a radar controller out of Santa Barbara. That's how Class Charlies work. When you depart a Class Charlie, you're going to be assigned a beacon code. That's a squawk code. We've discussed that in the past. You'll also likely get a departure frequency. That is the frequency to contact for the radar control, the initial radar service out of the Class Charlie airport. Now, as you can see here, our Class Charlie, the inner ring is the surface up to 4,000 feet MSL, and then the outer ring of the Class Charlie is 1,500 feet up to 4,000 feet MSL. So as we depart Santa Barbara Airport, we may or may not get departure instructions. It kind of depends, Charlie to Charlie airspace, what the kind of departure instructions and departure situation is going to be. But whenever you depart a Charlie, you need to be prepared to get specific departure instructions. That would include a heading and or an altitude. That could be given to us by either clearance delivery or Santa Barbara Tower. Additionally, once we get up and airborne, we might get an instruction then. We might get a turn or another altitude restriction. So we just have to be ready for that. So as we depart Santa Barbara, whether we get on-course approved or a heading and altitude to fly, we'll depart out and eventually they will allow us to proceed on course, in which case we will head eastbound over to the Fillmore VOR and then over into Burbank. Now, looking further at the airspace along the way, obviously the Class Charlie out here at Santa Barbara is about the only thing we have to worry about out here. However, as we get closer to Ventura and Fillmore, you'll notice that we have several Class Deltas down here. Now, we'll be cruising at 7,500 today, and these Deltas really shouldn't pose a factor. But again, for situational awareness purposes, it's good to know that they're here. These two Class Deltas are 2,000 feet and below, with Point Mugu's Class Delta at 3,000 feet and below. We discussed back in the CAT-7 that just because you're receiving flight following does not necessarily mean that you can transition to Class Delta airspace without talking to the tower. It's a bit of a gray area, and that's all explained in the video that I'll link once again in the right hand corner of this video. You can click on that if you'd like to check out how the coordination works on the back end and what you are expected to do as a pilot if you're trying to transition to Class Delta airspace while receiving flight following. So we'll hit Fillmore and then we'll make a slight right turn to go over to the Burbank area. Now, as we approach Burbank, we do have several pieces of airspace to be aware of. Now, I'm actually going to introduce a new style of chart that we haven't talked about in the CAT ratings before. And this is what's so great about SkyVector is you can go up to the right-hand side here and you can select any chart that is available. So we're actually going to select the Los Angeles Fly chart, FLY, and you'll see here this is a little bit more clear as far as the airspace. It just kind of cleans everything up for you. And we'll actually use this on the CAT-9 later on, and you'll see why that's important as you watch that video. But as far as today goes in the CAT-8, this will allow us to see the airspace a little bit better as we approach the Burbank area. And this, as far as briefing goes, will allow us to see exactly what we're going to be dealing with. So the first line that you see after we hit Fillmore is this big magenta circle. Now, what does that mean? We always think magenta, we think Class Charlies. Well, actually, this magenta circle doesn't really mean anything for us for this flight, because that is actually in regards to the Bravo airspace. This magenta circle is known as the Mode C veil, and it is for Bravo airspace. It surrounds every Class Bravo airport. It's a 30-mile ring that requires you to have a Mode C transponder within the 30-mile radius of the Bravo. We'll be getting flight following today, and we'll be operating within Class Charlies, which already requires us to have the Mode C transponder, so that's not going to apply. So we're going to ignore that Mode C veil for today. Now, as we continue eastbound, the next piece of airspace that I see is this Class Delta. This is Van Nuys Airport, and this is the Van Nuys Class Delta airspace. This dashed line is the Delta, which extends up to and not including 3,000 feet. Again, we're going to be cruising at 7,500, and while we'll likely be in our descent by then, I don't expect that we're going to be anywhere close to 3,000 yet. We'll probably be more close to 4,000 or 5,000 feet, so I don't anticipate that being a problem. However, we do need to make sure that we stay at or above 3,000 until we are within that 4 to 5 mile point from the Burbank airport, because that is where the Class Charlie airspace extends down to the surface. If we were to descend below 3,000 out here, we would be in Van Nuys' Class Delta airspace. Another Delta I see is the Whiteman Class Delta. That's this smaller Class Delta here just northwest of the Burbank airport. Whiteman Airport is a very small Class Delta, and the Delta extends up to and not including 3,000 feet. Again, we're getting a lot of these up to and not includings like we saw in the CAT-7, and that's all because overlying both of these Class Deltas is the Burbank Class Charlie airspace. As you can see here in magenta, 4,800 feet down to 3,000 feet is the outer portion of the Burbank Class Charlie airspace. Beyond that, we have the inner circle, which is 4,800 feet MSL down to the surface, and you even have this little sliver out here, which is 4,800 down to 3,500. So you'll need to always be cautious of these little tiny slivers. Don't just see this 4,800 down to 3,000 and assume that's the entire outer portion, because sometimes there will be little cutouts of airspace that are going to be different than the main portions of the airspace. So we just need to stay at or above 3,000 feet. That will keep us above both of these Class Deltas. And at that point, we will likely get a handoff over to Burbank Tower, and we will be given pattern entry into the runway. So let's discuss a little bit more about this arrival. Now, as we approach the Class Charlie, like we learned in the CAT-7, our requirements are two-way radio communications and a Mode C transponder. Well, we already have that Mode C transponder because we needed it to depart Santa Barbara, and we learned that most airplanes in the sim, if not all, have that transponder. So what about that two-way radio communications? Well, that's where the flight following comes in handy. You're already receiving flight following, and approach control handles the outer portion of the Charlie. So you're going to be okay to just trek right into the Charlie. You don't need to ask for permission. You don't need transition approved. It's not really like the CAT-7 because we're not calling up approach to receive that two-way radio communication. We're already going to be in contact with approach control, and therefore our two-way radio communications have been established long ago, and we can trek right through the Class Charlie. Now, of course, ATC could always tell you to remain outside of the Charlie, or they'll give you some sort of restriction at or above 4,500, or on a certain heading, remain north of Van Nuys Airport, something like that. But as far as the actual Charlie goes, unless you get a specific instruction to remain outside of it, you are permitted to enter it. Furthermore, you can just keep trekking straight towards Burbank Airport, and they will hand you off to the tower when appropriate. Now, occasionally things might get real busy, so if you do find yourself getting close to the airport, maybe within 4 to 5 miles, and you haven't gotten handed off to tower, it's good practice to maybe remind the controller or just try and ping them, and just a simple SoCal approach, Baron 0 Pop Echo, request handoff to tower, or would you like us to switch to the tower now? It just gets the controller looking at you and realizing, oh yes, this airplane is plenty close to the airport. I could then switch them over to tower. Now, that handoff from approach to tower is coordinated on the back end. Tower already knows about you, so it's not going to be like your normal Class Delta call where you have to explain your location and the type aircraft you are. You don't need to do that at all because you're already in the radar system. The tower has you on the radar and they know where you're coming from. So our call is basically just going to be like any sort of check-on, although you probably will want to include your intentions as far as a full stop or a touch and go. We'll discuss that as we actually approach Burbank during the flight. Lastly, I will point out one alternative to the Los Angeles fly chart. That'd be the Los Angeles TAC chart. It looks a lot like the sectional that we started with, but it's just a little bit more detailed and it's a little bit more spread out and clear for you. But either the fly or TAC chart would be your best option for when you are approaching the Burbank area. As you can see, the TAC chart only goes out a little bit past Fillmore VOR, so it's not going to work for you when you're actually departing Santa Barbara Airport. You'll be stuck with the VFR sectional then. Alright, into the cockpit we go. We're going to be doing an abbreviated setup, and a lot of this flight I'm actually going to be skipping ahead and just talking about the new things related to the CAT-08 rather than having to go over some of the things we've done before. But just a real brief rundown of the things I'm about to do that I'll skip through. I'm going to grab the ATIS, and I'm going to program the Fillmore VOR into my nav1, and I'm going to set that OBS pointing towards the Fillmore VOR. Again, that's just because I'm navigating with a VOR. If you're not familiar with VOR navigation, that's perfectly fine. You can navigate via GPS, dead reckoning, however you choose. And so after I get the cockpit set up, I'll get right back with you and we'll talk about calling clearance delivery. Okay, I've gotten the weather information. I'm actually going to use ATIS information Zulu today, which we've talked about in the past, is for when you're using custom weather. The weather in SoCal right now isn't quite VFR, so I'm just going to set VFR weather conditions in my sim. I tell the controller I have information Zulu, which is code word for saying I have my own custom weather. That way they're not going to question me when I'm trying to depart an airport that is currently IFR conditions. Now I'm going to bring up the airport diagram. And with every class Charlie, you're going to begin your flight by calling clearance delivery, unless it's just for simple closed traffic or pattern work. But because we are going to be leaving the airport, we will begin by calling clearance delivery. Now, that's one of the reasons we're calling clearance delivery. The second reason is because we're calling for flight following. In the CAT-6 rating, we discussed how if you're departing an airport and you're going to be getting flight following off the ground, you're going to essentially call the lowest controller first. And that means if there is a clearance delivery frequency, you're going to call them. If there is no clearance delivery frequency listed, you'll just call ground control. Here at Santa Barbara, because it's a class Charlie, they will have clearance delivery, and that's on 132.9er. So that's where we're going to begin. And back in the cockpit we go. I've already tuned that to our standby, so we're just going to swap it over to our active. So our call to clearance delivery is simply just to get our flight plan information into the computer. Now, fun fact about VFR flight plans, because we filed a VFR flight plan, we do so for every single CAT rating, right? It's a requirement for the CAT ratings. However, whether you're familiar with it or not, you actually do not have to file a VFR flight plan to fly VFR flight. That goes for PilotEdge when you're not actually doing a CAT rating. It also goes for the real world. The VFR flight plans, as far as the real world concerned, are simply for search and rescue purposes. It's so that if you don't close out your flight plan at the end of the day, or if someone just calls up and says, hey, so-and-so never came home for dinner, your VFR flight plan will provide critical search and rescue information as far as where you were going, how much fuel you had on board, how many people were on board your airplane, what kind of airplane, what color of airplane, all those things that they can use for search and rescue to hopefully find you. But it's important to realize that those VFR flight plans actually aren't seen by air traffic control. They're contained within the flight service station, and PilotEdge doesn't simulate flight service. It's all air traffic control. So when we file our VFR flight plan for the CAT rating, that is only for internal purposes, for PE-aware tracking, and just so the network can track your CAT rating. So as far as air traffic control goes, they don't know anything about us yet. We don't actually have a flight plan on file with them, and there isn't a way to file a VFR flight plan with them. Now that'll all change when you get into the I ratings and your IFR flying, but as far as VFR flying goes, there's no such thing as a VFR flight plan that's going to hit air traffic control system. Because of that, and the fact that we want to get our flight following off the ground, we're going to call clearance delivery, and we're going to give them all the information for our flight. That's going to include the type aircraft we are, the requested cruise altitude, which is 7,500 today, our destination, and of course we're going to tell them it's for the CAT-08 rating. Now we're not going to do any sort of taxi information here. We're not going to tell them where we are because obviously we're at Santa Barbara Airport. That's why we're calling Santa Barbara clearance delivery. And we don't need to tell them where we're parked unless they specifically ask us, because again, this position, clearance delivery, is just someone who's sitting in front of a computer in the control tower and entering flight plan information into the system. They're not actually looking out the window, they're not looking for you, and they don't really care where you are because they're just putting your information in the air traffic control system. So our call to clearance delivery is just going to be who we're calling. Remember, that's how we start every call. We have to address who we're calling. Who we are, again, every call. So who we're calling, who we are, and our request. It's just going to be those three things, and we will include the ATIS information as well. The reason we include the ATIS here is because the ATIS specifically says at the end of the ATIS, advise on initial contact, you have ATIS information blank. Today we have information Zulu, as we previously discussed. Santa Barbara clearance delivery, Baron 210 Papa Echo. We're requesting flight following to Burbank. We're a Beach Baron 58 slant Golf, cruising at 7,500 with information Zulu. And this is for the CAT-08 rating.
Baron 210 Papa Echo, Santa Barbara clearance, good morning. On departure, fly runway heading and maintain VFR at 1,500. Santa Barbara departure frequency 120.55, squawk 0375.
Runway heading at 1,500 feet. Departure frequency 120.55, squawk 0375, Baron 0 Papa Echo.
Number 210 Papa Echo, thanks, read back correct.
Okay, so we have received our flight following instructions off the ground. We discussed in our flight planning portion that we may or may not get instructions on departure, and we did in fact. And it's going to be runway heading, which means we just fly straight off the runway on the runway heading, which is we'll discuss a little bit later as we get our runway assignment. And then we will climb to and maintain 1,500 feet. And we'll talk about how long we have to do that for a little bit as we get on the upwind during the flight. We also got two other pieces of information that you might be familiar with from the CAT-06 rating, and that is our departure frequency, which is 120.55, and our squawk code, which is 0375. These are all things that you should prep for while you're on the ground here. It's much easier to do it now when you're not moving. 0375 is my squawk code. And while we're here, we're going to make sure we turn it to the altitude mode. And because I'm in Flight Simulator 2020, I have to do that in the client. But if you're in X-Plane, you can do that in the simulator yourself. Okay, so I've bugged 1,500 feet on the autopilot, and I will just wait for our runway assignment to bug the runway heading. Doesn't mean I'm going to be using the autopilot initially. It's just a good reminder for myself. You can also just do the same thing by writing it on a piece of paper, which I've also done, but this is just a good cockpit reminder for what our restrictions are. Our next step is to contact ground for taxi. We've done that many times, so I'll just get right into it. We'll look at the frequency of 21.7, and we are located just near the base of the tower here off taxiway Charlie. Santa Barbara ground, Baron 210 Pop Echo. Base of the tower, ready to taxi with information Zulu.
Baron 210 Papa Echo, Santa Barbara ground, good morning, runway 15 right, taxi via Charlie.
Runway 15 right, taxi via Charlie, Baron 0 Pop Echo. So we got assigned runway 15 right, which is going to be a very quick taxi here. We're here on Charlie, and we're just heading right over to 15 right. So that'll be simple, and we will brief that a little bit more as we get up to the runway. Okay, we're short of the runway now. One thing I will mention about the call for taxi there, I know I stated the ATIS information again, ATIS information Zulu, despite already telling clearance delivery. Oftentimes the ground controller wants to just verify you have the ATIS, so it's just a good practice to get into every time you call for taxi. Even though it might not be your initial contact, just throw the ATIS in there. It'll just kind of cover all your bases. Okay, short of the runway now, we're going to do our final takeoff checks. Remember, I'm not a real-world Baron pilot or a real-world twin pilot, so just try and focus on what I'm doing as far as the airspace and communications portion, not necessarily the flying of the aircraft. I'm going to tune tower. I've already done that, 119.7. And now our departure frequency, they gave us 120.55. We need to have that in our standby, so it's just a quick flip over when we take off. We don't want to be messing with dials when we depart. So I've got tower and then standby. I've got the departure frequency 120.55. Now, 1,500 feet was our altitude restriction, and our heading restriction was runway heading. Now we look at the chart, and it says 153. 153.5 actually. So we are going to just round that up to 154, and we're going to bug that for our heading. Okay, that's set now. You can see heading 154 and 1,500 feet. Again, that doesn't mean I'm going to use the autopilot on departure. It's just a good visual reference point. I'll have my heading bug here, so we know we need to be centered on that. And then similarly, once we get up to 1,500, we'll see that bug come into play there. Santa Barbara Tower, Baron 210 Pop Echo, holding short of runway 15 right.
Baron 210 Papa Echo, Santa Barbara Tower, runway 15 right, cleared for takeoff.
Clear for takeoff, runway 15 right, Baron 0 Pop Echo.
34.2.
34.2, 5 X-ray Sierra.
And gear coming up.
Santa Barbara departure, Sirius 397, Juliet Delta established on the hold.
Okay, so we're going to maintain that 154 heading.
Number 210 Papa Echo, radar contact, verify altitude.
We're leaving 500 feet, Baron 0 Pop Echo.
Baron 0 Papa Echo, thank you. Contact Santa Barbara departure, have a good day.
Contact departure, Baron 0 Pop Echo. Okay, we'll discuss what just happened in just a second. We're going to switch over and check in.
7 Juliet Delta, radar contact, altitude.
2,100 for 7 Juliet Delta.
We're going to watch our altitude here.
Publish missed and same intentions.
And we don't want to get so fixated on that we forget to look out the window here. We are still VFR,
907 Julia Delta, roger.
leveling off at 1,500 feet, and we're holding that heading. We're just waiting to get a word in with departure, and then we'll figure out what they want us to do.
907 Julia Delta, roger. Just continue to publish hold. Advise when you're ready to depart the hold.
I'll let you know when I'm ready to get out of here. 7 Julia Delta, thanks.
Santa Barbara departure, bearing 210 Pop Echo, 1,500.
9.2 for 10,000.
Oh, we got stepped on.
Number 210 Pop Echo, Santa Barbara departure. Good morning.
All right.
Number 45 X-ray Sierra,
So
SoCal
what just
approach,
happened,
altimeter
a lot just happened actually from the time we put the gear up to right now. So when we went gear up and we got off the runway, Tower asked us to verify our altitude, and they also radar ID'd us. So we got that radar contact from the tower. That's because the tower is a radar facility. So verifying our altitude was simply just to ensure that our Mode C was putting out the correct altitude to their radar system. And once they verify that within, it's got to be within 300 feet, then they can consider that a verified Mode C, and they can use it for separation purposes. So then at that point, they told us to contact departure. So we swapped over to the departure frequency, 120.55, and we checked in with departure. At that point, we were level at 1,500, so it's just a simple check on who we're calling, who we are, and our altitude. We don't have to tell him where we are because we're already in the radar system. He's looking at us on the radar, and he knows we're coming. So now we're just holding that 150. I've got a few degrees right there. We'll come back to 154. That's what we're shooting for, 154, and we're holding 1,500 feet. This is our assigned heading and altitude. We cannot deviate from this until we are instructed to resume on navigation, or maybe left turn on course approved, VFR altitudes our discretion. Until you hear something like that, we're still assigned to be on this heading and altitude. Resume on navigation, cancel altitude restrictions, bearing 0 Pop Echo. Alright, well, just like as we were talking about, he got to us right there, and our altitude restriction and heading restriction are now canceled. Now, it doesn't always mean those will come at the same time. So occasionally those will happen at different times, where they might allow us to turn on course and not climb, or they might allow us to climb and not turn on course. But for now, we are going to make a left turn out, and we're going to recenter the needle here and head direct to the Fillmore VOR. There we are. We've departed a Class Charlie airport. Now, they're not going to tell us that we've left the Charlie. That's not really relevant because we're receiving flight following. Now, if we were not getting flight following, then they would tell us that radar service terminated and frequency change approved. It's like what they tell us, and they tell us that's Squawk VFR as well. Again, that is an option for this rating. You can just depart and just say that you're not receiving flight following, or just ask for a VFR departure to the east. If you do that, it's basically assumed you do not want flight following unless you tell them that you do. And in this case, obviously, we told them we did want flight following. But if you were to just call up clearance delivery and request VFR departure to the east, they'd give you departure frequency squawk code. Essentially, the exact same things that you just saw happen would happen to you, except once we get to the outer end of the Charlie, or once we leave the Charlie vertically, they would terminate our radar service and send us on our way. But in this case, we want to remain with them because it will be all that much easier to get into Burbank later on. And this rating does require you to get flight following at some point, so might as well just do it at the time that we did.
Baron 0 Pop Echo, VFR traffic, 11 o'clock, 2 miles eastbound, up in case 5,600, type on up.
Traffic in sight, Baron 0 Pop Echo. Alright, so we got some traffic out here to the left. Looks like, well, we're climbing, so he's probably level, and we're just going to climb above him. This is why it's always important to keep your scan out the window. Yeah, we'll climb nicely above that traffic.
Baron 0 Pop Echo, contact Point Mugu approach 124.7, good day.
124.7, Baron 0 Pop Echo. Point Mugu approach, Baron 210 Pop Echo, 7,600.
Baron 210 Pop Echo, Point Mugu approach, Point Mugu altimeter 298.
908, Baron 0 Pop Echo. Still looking for traffic. We've got some traffic off here to our left. He'll be no factor, though. ATC will commonly not issue you traffic if it's going to be no factor. There's just really no point. But they are certainly watching that. If that airplane were to turn southbound right into us, I'm sure we would hear about it.
212, Baron 210 Pop Echo, contact SoCal approach 134.2, yeah.
134.2, Baron 0 Pop Echo. Alright, we've skipped ahead in the video a little bit. We're about 5 miles outside of the Fillmore VOR. And that puts us about 33 miles from the Burbank airport. We actually just got a handoff over to SoCal approach on 134.2, so I'm going to check in with them, let them know we have information in Zulu. Remember, custom weather today. It's good to get the ATIS about 30 to 40 miles out, and if you can, it's great to include it when you check on with the controller, because they might ask you if you have it. This way it just kind of gets you ahead of the game. SoCal approach, bearing 210 Pop Echo 7500 with ATIS information Zulu for Burbank.
Bearing 210 Pop Echo, SoCal approach, Burbank altimeter 2998.
908, bearing 0 Pop Echo. Alright, so I'm going to disregard the altimeter setting. I'm doing that because I have information Zulu. Remember, that's custom weather we talked about at the beginning of the flight, and therefore the altimeter setting he's giving me is real world. It's going to just mess me up, so I'm just going to disregard that. Now, as far as our heading goes here, we're about to hit Fillmore, so we're going to set our course on the OBS. Again, this is VOR navigation. If you're unfamiliar, don't worry about it. It's not critical for this flight. But we're going to set this to 100 on the OBS. So let's review our arrival into Burbank. Bring up the sectional again. Now let's look at the TAC chart. We looked at the fly chart earlier, and I discussed how there's also the TAC chart option. So we'll look at the TAC chart this time. Now we're just overhead Fillmore. We're just passing over Fillmore. So we've got about 30 miles, a little less than 30 miles to go to Burbank Airport. And remember that the Class Charlie is 3,000 up to 4,800. So we're going to just do a mental check. Class Charlie airspace, mode C transponder, check. And two-way radio communications, check. We're already talking to SoCal approach, so we are good to enter the Charlie. Now, we need to keep it at or above 3,000 until we are, let's get our exact distance actually here, 5 miles. So that's a typical inner circle for a Charlie, 5 miles. So until we get 5 miles from the Burbank Airport, which is actually going to be 23 miles from the Fillmore VOR. So once we're 23 DME from Fillmore, we'll know that we are inside the Charlie airspace. Now, we do have to be careful that we don't dip into the Whiteman class Delta in this little sliver here. So we'll try and maybe plan for a straight into runway 8. Since I'm using ATIS information Zulu, I can't pick up the ATIS, but we can expect runway 8 or 15 most likely, but we will adapt accordingly. Let's check out the airport diagram so we know what to expect here. We'll have a good taxi plan. We're going to be parking here at the FBO. So if we land runway 8, we'll plan for maybe a Delta 7 or Bravo turnoff to the left. If we land runway 15, we'll plan for maybe a Bravo 3 or Delta turnoff to the right. And lastly, you've got the tower frequency up here, so we're going to set that now, 118.7. Now, that's not to say we're not going to get another switch from approach control in the meantime, but we're just going to get that ready just in case this is our last approach control frequency. We'll get that ready on 118.7. While we're here, check out Burbank Tower. Remember, this is where it's going to tell you what to call the tower. Despite the airport being called Bob Hope Airport, the tower is called Burbank Tower. So you don't go saying Bob Hope Tower, you just want to say Burbank Tower. Alright, so 118.7, we'll put that in our standby for now. Alright, 118.7 set for the standby, so we're ready to switch to tower whenever he gives us the instruction. Now, looking out the window here, beautiful evening here in Southern California. There's, you can see LAX all the way out there, and the Pacific Ocean, Catalina Island, beautiful visibility out here. So this is Van Nuys Airport. These are the approach lights into 16 right for Van Nuys, and actually you can see Burbank out there. So we've got great visibility. This is really making the flight nice and easy. And I'm going to go ahead and kick off the autopilot, and I'll take it over myself. And I'm going to begin a gradual descent. Remember, not too much. We don't want to dip below 3,000 because that will put us into Van Nuys's Class Delta airspace. I'm also going to cheat a little bit to the right here because I was talking about that little sliver of Whiteman right here. So I know if I cheat to the right and kind of line up for more for runway 8, that will allow me to better miss that Whiteman Class Delta sliver. Remember that we could always get maybe a restriction from approach control. They might see us turn and say, "Ooh, you know, that's not working out too well. Remain north of Van Nuys Airport, or remain north of the runway 8 extended center line." That would be in reference to Burbank Airport. We would just have to remain north of the runway 8 final. But obviously, right now we don't have any restrictions whatsoever, so we are permitted to do whatever we want. We could do a 360 if we wanted to.
Bearing 210 Pop Echo, Burbank Airport, 10 o'clock, 15 miles, Van Nuys Airport, 10 o'clock, 8 miles from Burbank Airport site.
Got them both, Baron 0 Pop Echo.
Baron 0 Pop Echo, proceed overfly Van Nuys at or above 3,000.
We'll cross overfly Van Nuys at or above 3,000, Baron 0 Pop Echo. Okay, well that is great. That's exactly what we were kind of briefing actually, is we will overfly Van Nuys at or above 3,000 feet, and that will serve as a good way to miss the Class Delta there. Now, just out of good practice, I'm going to bug that 3,000 altitude there. Again, that's just a visual reminder for me, so I know not to dip below 3,000 right now. Remember, we've got Burbank Airport off our 11 o'clock. It's just behind here as we roll out. There it is. And then Van Nuys Airport, we need to cross that at or above 3,000. We're out of 5,100, 5,000 now, and we are about to enter the Class Charlie airspace, which begins at 4,800 feet.
Baron 0 Pop Echo, contact Burbank Tower, 118.7, good day.
118.7, Baron 0 Pop Echo, good day. All right, so we got the frequency change well in advance. We'll swap over to 118.7. Remember, we talked about if you get too close to Burbank, maybe within 3 to 5 miles, somewhere in there, and you haven't gotten switched over, it's a good idea to ping the approach controller and just say, hey, would you like us to switch to tower? Burbank Tower, Baron 210 Pop Echo, out of 4,000, inbound for a full stop with information Zulu.
Baron 210 Pop Echo, Burbank Tower, make straight in runway 8, wind 150 runway 8, clear to land.
Straight in runway 8 and clear to land, Baron 0 Pop Echo. All right, well that's nice and easy. This is runway 8 right in front of us here. Here's Van Nuys Airport, so we're going to keep it at or above 3,000. We're through 3,800 now. That should be no problem at all. We're just going to straighten out a little bit for runway 8, and we are going to get ground frequency ready on 123.9er. Okay, ground is ready on the standby. Here's 3,500 feet, and there goes Van Nuys Airport. So that altitude restriction no longer applies. So you might be thinking, well, 3,000 feet just over Van Nuys Airport is great, but once you're east of Van Nuys Airport, if you dip below 3, you're still in the delta. Well, that's actually true. However, the Burbank Tower and the SoCal approach have an agreement with Van Nuys Airport, and this is just a local thing that allows them to clip the airspace for arrivals into Burbank. So just because you get that restriction, you could, if you really want to just be extra sure, you could talk to the tower. You can just say, hey, verify that we can descend now to clip into Van Nuys Class Delta. Again, referencing that video I put in the top right earlier, and just to talk about the transitions and how the coordination is done on ATC's side. So you can double check if you want to be super sure, but you can rest assured that this one is okay, just knowing that the Van Nuys Tower has an agreement with Burbank Tower to allow them to clip the airspace on these descents into runway 8. Remember, I've got ground control ready on 123.9er. We've already briefed our taxi in, planning that left turn off on either Bravo or Delta 7.
723 Golf, taxi to parking via Alpha.
Parking via Alpha 722 Golf.
Frontier Flight 2212, contact LA Center.
And we will clear those hold bars as we do every time and come to a stop. Landing lights coming off, strobes coming off, and we'll clean up the airplane.
Good morning. Cross Clara and maintain 1
And our parking is just right off to the left here. Burbank Tower, Baron 0 Pop Echo is clear on Delta. Request taxi to Millionaire.
Baron 210 Pop Echo, taxi Millionaire via Bravo this frequency. Good day.
Taxi via Bravo to Millionaire this frequency, Baron 0 Pop Echo. And Millionaire is the name of the FBO in case you're curious about that. Remember, we're still without our result for the CAT-08 rating, so we will ask the controller whenever we get into the ramp here and situated. The rating does not really end until you get into the ramp, remember, so just because they're not giving you a rating when you get off the runway doesn't mean you failed, it doesn't mean anything bad, it just means they're going to make sure that you can get to the ramp correctly, because obviously if you cross the runway without permission, that is enough to be an unsatisfactory result for the rating.
Baron 210 Papa Echo, CAT-8 is the pass. Good job.
Appreciate it, Baron 0 Papa Echo. All right, well, there's our pass. Thanks for joining us for the CAT-8. We'll see you on the CAT-9, where we're going to start encountering Class Bravo airspace. That'll be next. We'll see you then.